Each year, City of Lenexa staff prepare a recommended operating budget, which is presented to the Mayor and City Council for consideration. The city's budget serves a crucial role that guides our efforts for the coming year. Over the next few months, the City Council will thoroughly review the recommended budget for 2027.
This presentation offers an opportunity for you to explore what is under consideration and to gain insight into our proposed spending priorities for the next year. We actively encourage residents to participate in the budget process by providing feedback and asking questions. You can email your questions to budget@lenexa.com or call 913-477-7544.
This is the agenda for our presentation today. I'll start by providing a brief overview before handing it over to Chief Financial Officer Nate Bloom, who will review the key elements of the proposed budget and provide revenue and expenditure projections. We'll end with a timeline outlining the remaining steps in the 2027 budget process. You can find the full recommended budget on our website. Search City Budget from the search bar on the homepage. And anyone with questions about the proposed budget can submit those to budget@lenexa.com at any time. Here's a look at how we ended last year and a preview of how things are going so far in 2026. Revenue collections were strong in 2025, particularly in our investments, as well as sales and use tax collections. This contributed to general fund reserves at year-end of 38%. In 2026, we are seeing continued strength in sales and use tax collections, and we have adjusted our projections to account for this. This slide compares the 2026 adopted budget to the 2027 recommended budget. From a top-line perspective, you can see here that the 2026 budget was $260.6 million compared to $275.1 million for the 27 recommended budget, or a 5.6% total increase. A few things to point out here are that the majority of this increase are attributable to both special revenue and economic development funds, which are shown on the bottom half of the slide at 9.7% increase, as well as the debt service fund. This is attributable to transfers in of the city's share of the County Public Safety Sales Tax 3, which is dedicated to debt service on the Lenexa Justice Center. The general fund, which is the city's main operating fund, increases by 3.2% in the 2027 recommended budget. Budget highlights are shown on this slide. You see here that the estimated assessed valuation for the city grew by 3.3% compared to the 2026 assessed valuation of $1.95 billion. This is the first time since the Great Recession that we've seen an increase of less than 5%. However, as Nate will discuss in a bit more detail later, this is largely attributable to a unique timing situation which resulted in the Advent Health Hospital valuation being included in our 26 assessed valuation and exempted in the 27 budget. As with many years, a large percentage of this year's growth in assessed valuation, or 61%, is attributable to new development or growth in the city. We are recommending a 0.25 mil property tax rate rollback, and if adopted, this will be the 9th consecutive year that we have reduced the city's mill levy. The proposed budget includes no other recommended changes to major user fees, the stormwater service charge, nor franchise fees. We are recommending the addition of 6 additional employees. This includes 2 police officers and a dispatcher in the police department, a pavement management inspector and a stormwater maintenance worker in municipal services, and a business operations manager in Parks and Recreation. City taxes are only a portion of the total property taxes that our residents pay. This slide illustrates how a resident can calculate their city taxes, or the specific amount of taxes attributable to any taxing jurisdiction, by using the proposed tax rate. This illustration can be found on page 13 of the budget document. The bottom line here is that the owner of an average Lenexa home will pay about $129.16 per month for all of the services they receive from the City of Lenexa. This is a representative list of the services our residents receive for this $129 per month. In addition to the outstanding fire and police protection and the quality of life benefits that flow from our 34 developed parks, the Old Town Activity Center, Farmers Market, Public Market, and our numerous events and festivals, City services funded by the property tax include the care, maintenance, sweeping, and snow and ice removal of over 835 lane miles of roadway, 182 miles of storm pipe, 220 stormwater BMPs, and 51 miles of trail. And there are numerous other services the city provides which aren't listed here as well. As I mentioned earlier, city tax accounts for only a portion of our residents' total property tax levy. This slide, which can be found on page 25 of the budget document, provides a little more insight into this. In 2025, city tax, which is shown here in blue, ranged from 21.5 to 23.7% of a resident's total property tax mill levy, depending upon the school district in which they are located. In every case, the school levy, which is depicted in red, accounted for the largest portion, ranging from 46 to 51%. The governing body has adopted these guiding principles, which set the expectations for city services and help to direct the allocations of resources in the budget. In past years, as well as this year, city staff keeps these principles at the forefront as we prepare the recommended budget. Throughout the budget document, we report alignment with these principles through key performance indicators and within the individual fund budgets. As you look through the budget document, you will see these icons, which indicate the specific guiding principles the budget supports. The guiding principles are superior quality services, prudent financial management, strategic community investment, extraordinary community pride, inclusive community building, responsible economic development, sustainable policies and practices, and values-based organizational culture. And with that, I'll hand it over to CFO Nate Bloom.
Thank you, Becky, for that overview. Now we're going to discuss some of the key elements of the fiscal year 27 recommended budget, starting with our budget principles. So how do we successfully navigate a consistently changing economic environment while maintaining our commitment to providing exceptional public services? We do that by sticking to our budget principles. These budget principles are the foundation for our fiscal year 27 recommended budget, and they are that we fund ongoing operating expenditures with ongoing revenue sources. An example of this would be funding personnel costs, which are an ongoing expense, with sales tax revenue, which is an ongoing revenue source. We also use one-time revenues for one-time expenditures. An example of this would be the ARPA funding the city received from the federal government a few years ago, which we used to reconstruct the Lenexa Old Town Activity Center. We also maintain sufficient reserve balances to address unforeseen events. The city must maintain reserves so that we can navigate an economic downturn such as the Great Recession and still fund the necessary functions of the city. Additionally, we must maintain sufficient reserves so that we maintain our AAA bond rating, which saves taxpayers hundreds of thousands, if not millions, when the city issues debt to fund major capital projects. We use a conservative approach to revenue estimating. Several of the city's revenue sources are very volatile and make up a significant portion of the budget, such as sales and use tax. This revenue source is sensitive to economic conditions and can be significantly impacted by state legislative changes. And then finally, the city prepares and funds equipment replacement, building maintenance schedules to predict future expenses and to make sure that we do not fall behind on maintenance. Before we get into the numbers, I wanted to briefly touch on the mechanics of municipal budgeting. Per the balanced budget law, the city is required to adopt a budget that is in balance where total resources equal total obligations. Additionally, the city is required to budget our reserves as expenditures, even though the city does not anticipate spending these funds during the budget year. The city's budget is made up of several different funds, which are separate fiscal entities used to track specific revenues and expenditures associated with a particular purpose. An example of this would be the Rec Center Fund, which is funded from user fees, and the revenue can only be spent on rec center operations or capital projects. Lenexa currently has 38 budgeted funds, and each of these funds fall into one of the following categories: General Fund, Debt Service Fund, Special Revenue Funds, which are restricted and not necessarily revenue to the city in the case of TIF or CID, and Enterprise Funds. A description of each category is shown on this slide. The General Fund is the principal fund of the city, which accounts for a majority of the city's operational expenditures. The Debt Service Fund is used to account for the payment of principal and interest on the city's general obligation bonds. Special Revenue Funds are used to account for revenues derived from specific taxes, grants, or other revenue designated for a particular function or activity. And then enterprise funds are used to account for their operations, finance, and operate in a manner similar to a private business. The intent is to provide goods or services to the general public on a continuing basis, primarily through user charges. So now we're going to dive into the numbers included in the fiscal year 27 recommended budget. The first column in this chart is the city's total recommended budget of $275.2 million. This includes the city's reserves, which are not planned to be spent in 2027, and the city's economic development funds, which are passed through and not revenue to the city. Since we do not intend to spend the city's reserve funds in 2027, the second column takes out our $96.3 million in reserves for a total of $178.9 million in expenditures. Since the city's economic development funds are passed through to reimburse developers for eligible TIF or CID expenditures within the district and are not revenue to the city, we take these funds out to show the actual operational expenditures for the city of $156 million in 2027. Again, per Kansas law, the city is required to budget reserve and economic development funds even though they are not operational expenditures for the city. This pie chart breaks out the city's total budget, including reserves and economic development funds by category. As you can see, the city's special revenue and economic development funds make up 23% of the city's overall budget. And as I mentioned before, these funds are either restricted or not revenue to the city. This chart breaks down the city's general fund and compares the fiscal year 27 recommended budget to the fiscal year 26 adopted budget. Excluding reserves, the budgeted expenditures for the general fund are increasing 3.9%, and in total, the fund is increasing 3.2%. We will go over the details of the increase during the remainder of this presentation. Some more key elements of the fiscal year 2027 recommended budget include a $0.25 reduction to the city's tax rate, and as Becky mentioned, this is the 9th consecutive year the city has reduced its tax rate, and we have forecasted the tax rate to remain flat in fiscal year 28 through 2031. This budget maintains sufficient general fund reserves for our AAA bond rating and an uncertain economy. This budget continues to focus on providing high-quality city services, and to be able to provide these level of services, we have to retain good employees and fund strategic priorities. This budget also plans for economic pressures, including workforce pressures, inflation, economic pressures, and also the pressure from significant growth within the city. The total fiscal year 27 recommended expenditure budget is $178.9 million, which is an increase of $6 million or 3.5% compared to the fiscal year 26 original budget of $172.9 million. Net of economic development funds, the expenditure budget is $156 million, which is an increase of $5.7 million or 3.8% compared to 2026 original budget of $150.3 million. Total general fund operating expenditures in the 2027 budget are $120.3 million. That's an increase of $4.5 million or 3.9% compared to the fiscal year 26 budget amount of $115.8 million. Total budgeted full-time equivalent FTE positions are 575.14 for 2027. As Becky mentioned, this is a 6 FTE increase compared to 2026 revised budget of 569.14 FTE. Finally, the estimated mill levy of 25.984 mills, again, is a reduction of $0.25 mil from 2026, and the stormwater service charge remains at $109 per EDU, unchanged from 2026, and I believe since about 2015. Now we will look at the city's major revenue sources. The first major revenue source of the city is property tax revenue. In order to calculate the city's estimated property tax revenue for 2027, we take the city's assessed valuation received from Johnson County times the city tax rate. For the 2027 budget, Lennox's assessed valuation increased 3.3% to $2.01 billion, compared to $1.95 billion in 2026. Approximately 61% of this increase in the city's assessed valuation for 27 is due to new growth or new development within the city. On its face, the city's 3.3% increase in assessed valuation is the smallest increase the city has seen since 2013. However, due to the county including the exempt Advent Health Building in the city's final assessed valuation for the fiscal year 26 budget, the county overstated the city's 2026 assessed valuation by 1.2%. Essentially, the 7.1% increase given to the city last year was actually 5.9%. The county did remove the Advent Health Building in the city's assessed valuation in May of 2026 for the 27 budget. So the valuation does not take into account that building anymore going forward, but shows a small year-over-year increase due to the valuation in 2026 being overstated by that 1.2%. If done accurately, the city would have received a 5.9% increase from the county in 2026 and roughly a 4.5% to 5% increase for 2027. The main impact of this change is in the City Center TIF fund due to the Advent Health Building being in that district. This chart details the city's mill levy from 2018 to our estimated levy of 25.984 mills in 2027. As Becky mentioned, this is the 9th consecutive mill levy decrease since 2018. This chart shows the dollar value impact of the city's 9 mill levy reductions since 2018. The value of 1 mill is $1.95 million, and the total mill levy reductions by the city have been 5.848 mills since 2018. That equates to approximately $11.4 million in annual revenue deferred or forgone by the city. I will also note that the dollar value of these mill levy reductions increase each year that the city's assessed valuation increases due to the value of each mill going up. The Kansas State Legislature requires the city to calculate its revenue neutral rate, and if the city plans to exceed the revenue neutral rate, it must hold a public hearing. The definition of the revenue neutral rate is the mill levy required to raise the same amount of property tax revenue as the prior year using current year assessed valuation amounts. Based on the city's assessed valuation of $2.01 billion, the city's revenue neutral rate is 25.359 mills. That would be a reduction of 0.875 mills from the current fiscal year 26 tax rate and a further reduction of 0.625 mills from the fiscal year 27 recommended tax rate of 25.984 mills. The dollar value of this reduction from our current fiscal year 2026 tax rate is $1.71 million and a $1.2 million reduction from the recommended 2027 tax rate of 25.984 mills. So what are the impacts of the increase in the city's assessed valuation and the quarter mil reduction to the tax rate? The city's estimated property tax revenues are projected to increase by 2.4% to $50.7 million versus $49.5 million in fiscal year 26, assuming a delinquency rate of 3%. Property tax revenue is estimated at $41.8 million for the general fund and $8.9 million for the debt service fund in 2027. Again, 61% of the increase in assessed valuation, which impacts our property tax revenue, is due to new growth within the city. Another major revenue source for the city is sales tax. The city currently has a 1.375% city sales tax and also receives a portion of the countywide sales tax revenue, which are estimated to generate $39.3 million in 2027. These projections are up 7.9% from the fiscal year 26 original budget and down 1% from the fiscal year 2026 re-estimate. The fiscal year 2027 sales tax projections include 3% increase for each revenue source as compared to the 2026 re-estimate. However, the countywide public safety sales tax 3 sunsets in March 2027, so the city will lose its share of that revenue source. I will also note that the increase in projected revenue from sales tax also increases the general fund reserve requirements to meet policy levels and our AAA bond rating threshold. Additionally, the increase in projections automatically increases transfers from the general fund to the capital improvement fund, as both the city's 3/8 sales tax and the city's share of the countywide public safety 3 sales tax are passed through and dedicated to specific capital projects. The estimated fiscal year 27 use tax revenue in the city's general fund is $17.5 million from both the city and the county, which is up 8% from the fiscal year 26 original budget of $16.2 million, but down 1.1% from fiscal year 26 re-estimate of $17.7 million. The fiscal year 27 use tax projections again include a 3% increase for each of the revenue sources. However, the county-wide public safety sales tax 3, which includes a use tax, sunsets in March 2027, so again we'll lose our share of that revenue. And I'll again just note that the projected revenue increases in use tax also increase the general fund reserve requirements meet policy levels and our AAA bond rating thresholds. And it also increases the transfers from the general fund to capital improvement fund. Again, as the city's 3/8 cent sales tax and our share of the countywide public safety sales tax 3 are passed through and dedicated to specific capital projects. The stormwater capital charge is included on a property owner's tax bill, and the funds are used to expand the city's stormwater system. The estimated fiscal year 27 revenue from the stormwater service charge is $7.03 million. That's up 4.1% from fiscal year 2026 original budget of $6.75 million. This increase in revenue is due to new development within the city, and as we mentioned, the rate of $109 per EDU remains the same as fiscal year 26. Total revenue in the fiscal year 2027 budget is $175.4 million. Over 43.1% of that revenue comes from property taxes, and 43.6% comes from non-property taxes, which includes sales and use tax. Now let's take a look at our expenditure projections for the fiscal year 27 budget. Personnel costs are one of the city's largest expenses. Staff has previously received direction from the council to not fall behind on compensation and benefits. The recommended budget includes a 4.9% increase in funding for employee compensation and appropriate market adjustments, as well as the 6 new FTE that Becky mentioned previously. Additionally, it includes 3% slippage for major city departments, including police, fire, parks and recreation, municipal services, and community development. City contributions for employee health insurance increases are anticipated to increase 6% or $570,000 from $9.53 million in 2026 to $10.1 million in 2027. The fiscal year 2027 contractual services and commodity expenditures are $19.5 million in the general fund compared to $19.2 million for the fiscal year 26 budget. The increase of $290,000 is 1.5% over the fiscal year 2026 budget. Fiscal year 27 capital outlay expenditures are at $550,000 in the general fund, and that is a decrease of 37.3% from fiscal year 26's budgeted amount of $878,000. Although significantly improved from a few years ago, the city continues experiencing lingering issues related to the delivery of critical equipment. Currently, the wait for the new fire apparatus is still several years out after the city places its order. Additionally, the city is seeing significant increases to the cost and experiencing shortages of IT equipment, mainly due to high demand for chips and equipment to support large IT projects nationwide. The fiscal year 27 economic development payments are $23.6 million compared to $23.1 million in the fiscal year 26 budget. The increase of $500,000 or 2.2% is primarily due to new development in several districts. And again, a majority of this revenue received in these funds are passed through and are not revenue to the city. The general fund transfer to the capital improvement fund for the pavement management program is $1.95 million in 27. That's equivalent to approximately 0.78 mils, which has been dedicated to that project for several years. And that compares to $1.90 million in fiscal year 26, an increase of about $50,000 or 2.6%. The general fund transfer to the equipment reserve fund increased to $3.4 million in fiscal year 27 compared to $2.25 million in 2026. There is no general fund transfer to the rec center in 2027 due to continued positive results in the rec center fund and record membership rates. So this is a look at our total expenditures in the fiscal year 27 budget of $178.9 million. Public safety is the largest share at $43.3 million or 24% of the total budget. Each year, the city puts together a multi-year financial forecast for each of its funds. However, we focus mainly on the city's general fund, debt service fund, and stormwater fund, as these funds make up over 70% of our total budget. Some of the assumptions included in the 5-year financial model for the general fund include assessed valuation increase of 4% fiscal year 28 through 2031. This is a conservative estimate. However, state legislation has threatened to cap assessed valuation growth at 4% annually. City sales tax is projected to increase 3% annually from fiscal year 28 through 2031, and employee compensation increases are projected to increase 4% from fiscal year 28 through 2031. This chart shows that the general fund is structurally balanced through the life of the forecast, with small increases to fund balance in each year from fiscal year 28 through 2031. General fund reserves are projected to be between 35 to 37% through the life of the forecast. Per policy, the reserve balance of a general fund should have a balance between 30 to 35% of revenues. However, in order to maintain our AAA bond rating and plan for possible economic downturns or unforeseen events, staff anticipates keeping the reserve balance just over the max percentage. The debt service fund shows expenditures exceeding revenues in 2027 through 2029. Over the last few years, the city has increased reserves in the debt service fund to pay for major capital projects included in the financial model, and some that are on the horizon. Additionally, the increase in reserves for the debt service fund are due to the transfer into the city's share of the countywide public safety sales tax 3, which has been dedicated to pay for the debt service on the Lenexa Justice Center. Revenues have exceeded debt service, but the sales tax sunsets in March 2027 will be spent down in future years. Just a slide about a few of the major capital projects, including the financial model, Fire Station 6, $28 million for that capital project, Lone Elm Interchange, and then Canyon Creek Boulevard and 91st Street, amongst others. The Stormwater Fund is structurally balanced through the life of the forecast. The stormwater capital charge is anticipated to remain at $109 per EDU for all 5 years of the forecast. And revenue increases shown are due to new development coming online within the city. Next steps in the city's budget process are laid out in this slide. On July 7th, the City Council will consider a resolution to set the public hearing for the revenue neutral rate and adoption of the fiscal year 2027 budget for September 1st. This item is earlier in the process this year due to the requirement that the city notify the county of the public hearing dates and our intent to exceed the revenue neutral rate by July 20th. The second City Council meeting in July is on July 21st, which is the day after the deadline. However, this is procedural, and by approving these resolutions, the city is not held to a specific mill levy or budget, but may adjust both as desired by council. The detailed fiscal year 27 budget information for each city department will be presented on July 14th. We invite you to share your feedback on the fiscal year 27 recommended budget by emailing us at budget@lenexa.com or by calling 913-477-7544.